My name is Nancy. I'm 35 years old and I live alone in a small beige-sided house on the edge of Colorado Springs. It isn't fancy, but it's mine. There's a narrow porch where I keep a single rocking chair and a pot of rosemary that somehow survived 3 winters. Inside, everything has its place: clean surfaces, neutral walls, soft rugs that don't shift when you walk. Some people might call it sterile. I call it peace. I work as a design manager for a mid-sized interior design firm. The job is fast-paced but structured, and I like it that way. I meet with clients, help bring their vision to life, then come home to a space that's entirely my own. No children, no roommate, no chaos. Just me, my color palettes, and my carefully arranged bookshelves. Every evening around 6, I make myself a cup of mint tea and sit by the front window. It faces west, so the sun sets right through the slats of the blinds. The light comes in soft and orange, touching the edge of my coffee table, warming the hardwood floor. Some nights I read. Other nights, I just watch the sky fade. I don't always notice the moment it turns dark. It's slow like that. Peaceful, easy to miss when it changes. People ask me sometimes if I get lonely. I usually say no because saying yes would feel like failing at something I chose. The truth is, I like the quiet. I like knowing that if a glass is out of place, it was me who moved it. That if the fridge is empty, I have no one else to blame. There's a comfort in that kind of control. A comfort I fought hard to build. It wasn't always like this. There were years of noise. Years when I stretched myself thin, trying to hold up people who never thought twice about leaning on me. I won't pretend I'm perfect. I've been cold. I've held grudges longer than I should have. But I've also loved deeply. I've forgiven people who never said, "Sorry." I've picked up calls I didn't want to answer just because they came from someone with the same blood. Still, I built this life for a reason. For the peace, for the routine. For the silence that doesn't come with yelling or slammed doors. That night when the phone rang, I almost didn't answer. It was late after 10. I had just rinsed my mug and turned off the lights in the kitchen. I stood there for a second, staring at the screen, watching a familiar name flash. Hannah. My sister. We hadn't spoken in months. And that's where it really begins, I guess. Not with an explosion. Not with a scream. But with a phone call. And the sound of someone crying on the other end. When I saw her name on the screen, my first reaction wasn't concern. It was confusion, then hesitation, then that old, dull pull in my chest I never quite learned how to ignore. Hannah. She's my younger sister by 6 years, though most of the time it feels like more. Growing up, she was always the wild one, always in motion, a tornado in a tiny frame. She had this way of laughing that made people forget what she'd just done. She was reckless, impulsive, but somehow charming enough to escape every consequence. At least that's how our mother treated her. Mom used to say, "Hannah just needs a little more help than you did," which in our family meant I was expected to be the one doing the helping. I was the dependable one, the steady one, the one who didn't slam doors or sneak out after midnight or forget curfews. I got straight. As I helped clean up after dinner, I learned not to complain because no one ever listened when I did. That's just how it was in our house. I absorbed the silence. Hannah broke it. And somehow we were both punished and rewarded for those roles in different ways. Dad was quieter. He worked long hours, and even when he was home, his body was present more than his mind. If things got tense between us girls, or if Mom yelled too loud, he'd just go mow the lawn or retreat to the garage. He didn't shout, he didn't get involved, and eventually we stopped expecting him to. When we were teenagers, I started keeping a little notebook under my bed. I wrote down everything Hannah did that I felt was unfair. Every time she wrecked something and I had to clean it up. Every time she blamed me and Mom believed her. At the time, it made me feel powerful, like I could hold her accountable somehow. But years later, when I found that notebook during a move, I read through it and felt nothing but tired. That night, the call came just as I was about to go to sleep. I picked up without saying hello. Her voice came through shaky Nancy. She didn't even try to pretend she wasn't crying. I could hear her sniffling, could almost picture her sitting on the floor of some dark apartment, knees pulled up to her chest, like she used to do when she was little and got caught lying. "I don't know what to do," she said. "I lost my job. The company shut down. They just closed overnight. I didn't say anything, I just waited. And then I got sick. They think it's West Nile. I've been to the ER twice. I don't know what's happening, I'm scared. Her voice cracked then, and something in me cracked with it. Even after everything, even with the distance between us, there was still a part of me that wanted to fix things, still a part that remembered the way she clung to me when she had a fever as a kid, or the way she used to write my name in the sand whenever we went to the beach. "Have you called Mom and Dad?" I asked. I did. They said they can't come back from Florida. Said they'd help me find a clinic or something, but they don't really get it. I'm alone. I believed that part. Our parents weren't cruel. Just absent. They retired early, bought a house in a gated community with palm trees and poolside barbecues, and slowly faded out of real conversations. Calls became shorter. Holidays turned into group texts. When they left, it felt less like a goodbye and more like a shrug. After I hung up, I paced around the kitchen. I stared at the clean counter, the calendar with no obligations, the mug I had just washed and set perfectly on the rack. It had taken me years to build a life that no one else could mess up, but Hannah's voice still lived in my bones, and guilt, as always, had its own volume. 2 days later, she arrived at my front door. I hadn't seen her in nearly a year. She looked thin, pale. Her skin was patchy, her hair dull. She moved like her limbs weighed more than they used to. I opened the door and stepped aside without saying anything. That first night, I brought her a thermometer and a glass of water. I helped her into bed and sat with her until she fell asleep. I told myself it would be temporary, just until she got better, just until she could stand on her own 2 feet again. But even then, part of me knew the line I was walking wasn't straight. Because helping Hannah never ended at helping. It always meant carrying and eventually breaking. In the beginning, I told myself I didn't mind. I adjusted my schedule so I could work from home. More often, I set up her prescriptions in a plastic tray with labeled compartments. I cooked broth when her appetite was low and oatmeal when her stomach hurt. I left soft music playing in the background, thinking it might help her rest. I even moved some of my books to the basement to make room for her things in the guest room. It was the same room where I used to fold laundry on Sundays. Now it smelled like eucalyptus and cough drops. The lamp she liked stayed on all night. The curtains stayed shut during the day. She barely left the bed those first 2 weeks. Her skin looked dull and gray. Her voice was weak. She flinched when the sun hit her face through the window. Every time I brought her a tray of food or reminded her to take her pills, she'd whisper, "Thank you," like I was doing more than any sister should. And maybe I was, but it didn't feel unnatural. Then it felt like a pause, a detour I could manage. Then the little things began. One morning, I found my dresser drawer half open, not wide enough to make a mess, but enough to notice a necklace I rarely wore was flipped over on the velvet pad. Another time, a bottle of lotion I kept in the bathroom was moved from the cabinet to the counter. My favorite coffee mug disappeared for 3 days before turning up on the porch. At first, I thought I was imagining it. I even laughed it off like maybe I was just tired, but then it happened more often. She began lingering in the kitchen when I was cooking, not to help, just watching. One afternoon, I caught her scanning the wine rack, tracing the labels with her finger like she was browsing. When I asked if she wanted a glass, she said no, just curious. One night, I walked past the living room and saw her flipping through one of my design magazines. She held the pages too tightly. She paused on an article about custom woodwork and said, "This table looks just like yours. Bet it costs a fortune." I didn't answer. I told myself it was the sickness making her restless, that maybe being stuck in one place in someone else's house made people behave differently. I kept repeating that logic until it stopped working. Then one morning I was making coffee, still half asleep, when she came up behind me. "This place must have cost a lot, huh?" she said, leaning against the counter in my robe. I nodded, too tired to think. It's decent, I worked hard for it. When I looked at her, I caught something in her face. A flicker, not admiration, something sharper, like envy dressed up as interest. She smiled, but her eyes didn't match, and I felt for the first time in weeks that I wasn't sharing my home with a sister. I was sharing it with someone taking notes. I tried to shake it off, told myself not to be paranoid. but the truth was harder to ignore than I wanted to admit. She was healing, yes, but something else was growing too. A distance. A shape I couldn't name yet, but I felt it. Like a room filling slowly with smoke. And me standing in it. Still telling myself, it's only fog. It was a Friday. The kind of Friday where nothing felt urgent. I had worked late, answered a few last-minute emails, and picked up takeout from the Thai place near my office. The house was quiet when I got home, just the soft hum of the fridge and the scent of lavender from a candle I had lit that morning. Then I walked into the living room. Hannah was sitting on the edge of the couch, her posture straight, her hair pulled back. She was wearing a floral dress I hadn't seen in years, one I had packed away in a box after thinking it didn't feel like me anymore. She had found it, and now she was wearing it like she belonged in it. Jason sat next to her. His elbows rested on his knees, his hands clasped tightly like he was holding something together that had already broken. He didn't look up when I entered, just kept staring at the floor. Something in my stomach shifted. "What's going on?" I asked. Hannah looked at Jason, then back at me. Her face was calm, but her voice shook. "You should probably sit down." I didn't. She took a breath. "There's something I need to tell you," she said. "It's important." Jason finally looked up, then his face pale and still. "I'm pregnant," Hannah said. The words didn't land all at once. They hung there like steam in the air. Slow, heavy. I blinked, pregnant. She nodded. "With whose baby?" That's when she looked at Jason again. I followed her gaze. He didn't avoid it. He didn't flinch. He just bowed his head slightly as if bracing for impact. It was like everything around me slowed down. I could hear the ticking clock above the fireplace. I could see the outline of our wedding photo hanging above the bookshelf. I could feel the weight of the takeout bag still in my hand. It was Jason. My husband. My sister. The words weren't necessary. Their silence said everything. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't ask why. I stood there still holding the food, my heart beating louder than anything in the room. "I know you're angry," Hannah said quietly, "but what's done is done. And now, I can't live here feeling like a criminal. Jason and we want to raise this baby. We think it would be better if you moved out." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was absurd. Like watching someone set your house on fire and then asking you to leave because the smoke bothers them. "Come again," I asked. Her voice faltered slightly. "I just thought you'd understand. I mean, we're family. This baby is your niece or nephew." "Don't call me your sister," I said. My voice was flat cold but steady. "That baby is the result of betrayal. While you were living off my food, my medicine, my roof, you expect me to step aside." Jason still hadn't said a word. I turned to him. "You have nothing to say." He cleared his throat. "I didn't know Hannah would tell you like this." "So you knew?" It only happened a few times," he said. "We didn't plan it. It just happened." "Like slipping in the shower," I said. My voice cracked just slightly then, not from sadness, from disbelief. "I trusted you," I whispered, "both of you, and you sat in my house at my table and made a choice." Jason looked down again. Hannah stood up, her hand resting on her stomach like she thought it would shield her. "I'm pregnant," she said again, softer this time. "You can't just kick me out." "No," I said, "but I can choose not to leave my own home." I dropped the takeout bag on the table, walked to the cabinet where I kept our documents, pulled out the folder with the house deed and mortgage statements. Every single one in my name. I laid them on the coffee table next to the untouched pad, tie, and spring rolls. "This house," I said, "is mine. Every inch, every room paid for before I ever married Jason. There's nothing here with your name on it." Hannah looked stunned. Jason looked defeated. "You thought this house belonged to both of us," I said to her. She nodded slowly, the color draining from her face. "You should have checked," I said. Jason rubbed his temples. I told her I was handling finances. "Why?" she asked him, her voice cracking for the first time. "You said?" "I said it because I didn't want to admit I wasn't contributing," he replied. "You thought I was a successful author. I've been stuck on the same manuscript for 3 years. She stepped back like he'd slapped her. You lied to me, she said. And you betrayed me? I said, fair trade. I didn't shout. I didn't scream. But I had never felt louder in my life. You both need to pack your things, I said. Be out within the hour. If not, I'll call the police. Neither of them moved. So I turned around and walked upstairs, without looking back. When I came back downstairs, the air had shifted. The sun had gone down completely, leaving the room in a dull half-light. Jason and Hannah were still in the living room, still frozen like they were waiting for me to change my mind. I placed the folder on the table, opened it without a word. Inside were the documents I had pulled from the safe upstairs, mortgage statements, closing disclosures, a copy of the deed, everything signed with my name. Dated years before Jason ever moved in, years before Hannah ever stepped foot in this house. Jason didn't even look at them. He just stared ahead like he already knew what they said. But Hannah leaned forward. She skimmed the top page, her eyes moving fast, then slow. She looked up at me. This is all yours. I nodded. I thought, Jason, you thought wrong. There was no satisfaction in saying it, no sense of revenge, just clarity. She sank back into the couch, pressing a hand to her stomach again. That gesture was beginning to feel rehearsed. I can't leave. She said I don't have anywhere else to go. You should have thought about that before sleeping with my husband. Jason shifted slightly like he was about to say something, then stopped. I turned to him. You've got nothing, Jason. No ownership, no stake, not even a bank account with this address on it. He didn't argue, just lowered his eyes like a man waiting out a storm. I didn't do this to hurt you. Hannah said I was sick. I was confused. He made me feel seen. Stop, I said, just stop. She opened her mouth again, but I cut her off. You want forgiveness? You want a clean slate? You think being my sister gives you access to that. Her face tightened. But it doesn't, I said, not anymore. I picked up an empty suitcase from the hallway closet and placed it beside her. Start packing. She looked at it like it was a threat. You can't be serious. I am. Tears welled up in her eyes, but I didn't flinch. Where will I go? She asked. That's not my problem. Jason finally stood. He looked smaller than I remembered, not just physically, but in presence. His shoulders drooped. His voice was thin. I'll help her pack. I nodded once. I didn't want to see them scramble. I didn't want to hear their voices rising upstairs, so I walked outside and stood on the porch. It was cold quiet. I looked up at the roofline, the faint outline of my rosemary plant, the porch light flickering slightly like it always did when it rained. This was still my home. It had always been, and now for the first time in weeks I felt it again. I waited there until the sound of footsteps came from inside. Jason came out first, carrying 2 bags. He paused when he saw me, his eyes scanning my face for something. Recognition, pity, regret. But I had nothing left to offer. Hannah followed a moment later, dragging the suitcase I had handed her. Her hoodie was pulled tight around her face. She didn't say anything. Neither did I. They walked down the steps toward the street where their car was parked. Jason opened the trunk. Hannah turned around just for a second. I saw her lips move. I don't know if she said sorry. And honestly, I didn't care. I went inside and closed the door. The door closed behind them with a soft click. That was it. No last-minute begging, no dramatic parting words, just a silence so thick it pressed against my skin. I stood there for a long moment, leaning against the door, listening to the sound of nothing. No footsteps upstairs, no keyboard clacking from Jason pretending to work, no medicine bottles rattling on the kitchen counter. Just the house, just me. I didn't cry. I wasn't even sure if I could. I walked slowly through each room like I was seeing it for the first time. My living room, my hallway, my kitchen. Every surface still held fingerprints that didn't belong to me. The guest room was first. The bed was still unmade, the sheets crumpled in the middle like a ghost had climbed out and never returned. Her hoodie was thrown over the back of the chair. I picked it up and tossed it into a bag. No sorting. No folding. No second thoughts. Just removal. Every item felt like a string I had to cut hair ties on the windowsill, a cracked phone charger under the bed, empty prescription bottles on the nightstand. I threw them all into the suitcase. There was no music, no sound but the rustling of fabric and the steady zip of zippers being closed. In the bathroom, I gathered her toiletries: toothbrush, mouthwash, the vitamin gummies she said made her feel better. Her robe was still damp, hanging behind the door. I pulled it down and dropped it into the bag. Then came Jason's things. Not many. He didn't bring much to the marriage, not materially anyway. A few paperbacks, mostly unread, a towel I bought him for our second anniversary, a mug he used every morning even though it was mine to begin with, his notebooks full of half-finished stories. They all went into a second bag. I didn't read a single page. I didn't pause. If something made me stop moving, I didn't let it win. I dragged both bags to the front hallway and set them by the door. Then I stood in the center of the living room and breathed. The air felt dense, like the house had gone through a fire, but with no flames, just heat, just wreckage. I walked to the windows and opened every one. The cold air rushed in fast and sharp. It filled the space quickly, pushing out the breath of people who no longer lived here. It was quiet, but not peaceful. Not yet. I made a cup of mint tea. The kettle took longer than usual to boil, or maybe time just slowed in strange moments. I stood at the stove, waiting, not thinking, just letting the sound of water rising fill the room. When it whistled, I poured steeped and took the mug with me to the couch. The same couch where they had sat. I didn't avoid the spot. I sat right there. Took a sip. It was too hot. Still, I held the mug in both hands and looked out the window. The sky was almost black now, no stars visible, just a flat blank night pressing down. Somewhere out there they were driving away. And here I was reclaiming space. Not loudly, not dramatically. But in motion, in silence, in the choice to begin again one drawer at a time. The next morning my phone rang before I had finished my first sip of coffee. I let it ring. I knew who it was. I sat in the quiet kitchen, steam rising from my mug, watching the screen flash with her name, Mom. When it finally stopped, the voicemail icon appeared like a verdict. I stared at it, then hit play. Her voice filled the room, sharp-clipped. No greeting. I heard what you did to your sister. She's pregnant and you kicked her out of your house. Are you proud of that, Nancy? There was a pause just long enough to let the words hang like a threat. You always were cold, but this is cruel. I didn't delete the message. I didn't play it again. I just sat there letting the words settle like dust on glass. An hour later, she called again. This time I answered. Hi, Mom. You're finally picking up, she snapped. So it's true. What exactly did Hannah tell you? She said you threw her out, that you're filing for divorce, that she begged you to let her stay and you refused. She's carrying a child. Nancy. I stayed quiet for a beat, then said, She's carrying my husband's child. There was silence on the line. Then that doesn't mean you throw her out on the street. She's your sister. I pressed my thumb against the edge of the counter, grounding myself. She's the sister who betrayed me, I said. While I was at work, while I was making her meals, she was sleeping with my husband. She's younger, more vulnerable. Jason's older. He knew what he was doing. You don't know what he said to her. I laughed once, not because it was funny, because it was familiar. The way she always found a way to explain Hannah's behavior, to excuse it, repackage it as confusion, not calculation. She's 29, Mom, not 16, she knew. You're being too harsh. No, I said I've just stopped trying to be the good daughter when it costs me everything. There was a long pause. Then her voice shifted, lower, heavier. You've changed? It wasn't said with concern. It was an accusation. I said, you weren't here. You weren't here when I was cleaning up her mess. You weren't here when she took everything I had and looked me in the eye like I owed her more. She's still your sister, that baby. That baby is none of my business. Blood is blood, she said. No choice is choice. She didn't respond right away. And in that silence, I felt it. The final thread pulling tight, the last line between who I was supposed to be and who I had become. "Why didn't you take her in?" I asked softly. "What? You say I was cruel. You say I've changed, but you didn't offer to bring her to Florida. You didn't fly out when she said she was sick. You didn't pick up that call in the middle of the night. I did." Her breath caught slightly. "I did," I repeated, and she thanked me by trying to replace me. She sighed. "You don't understand." "No," I said, "you don't." I ended the call. Not with anger. Not with a slam. But with the kind of stillness that comes when you realize someone never really saw you at all. And maybe never will. It had been just over 2 weeks since they left the house. The divorce paperwork was already in motion. My lawyer had drawn up the terms. There would be no battle. Everything was in my name. There was nothing to divide. I had stopped taking calls from my parents. I let the voicemails pile up. Sometimes I played them on speaker just to remind myself how calm I sounded when I didn't reply. The story was out. At least Hannah's version of it. According to her, I had lost my mind. I had thrown her out in a jealous rage. She was pregnant alone and heartbroken. People love a tragedy when it paints a woman as hysterical. No one called to ask for my side. Not until Jason. The message came late. I was making dinner, something simple, salmon and rice. My phone buzzed on the counter. "Jason, I need to tell you something. It's important." I stared at the screen. I didn't feel a rush of anything. Not fear, not longing. Just a flicker of curiosity, or maybe closure. I replied with 2 words. "Say it." Less than a minute later, he called. I picked up. "Hi," he said. His voice was flat hollow. I didn't answer. "I'm not calling to ask for anything," he said. "Not forgiveness, not sympathy. I need you to know the truth." "Go on." Hannah was never pregnant. Silence. He kept talking. "I suspected it early on. She told me, but wouldn't let me go to the doctor with her. Said the appointments made her anxious. I offered to drive her. She made excuses. I gave her clinic numbers. She wouldn't call." My hands went still on the cutting board. "She said the doctor told her to avoid stress, to stay in bed, to not move around too much." I leaned against the counter. Let the words settle. "And the ultrasound?" I asked. "I never saw one. She said she lost it. Said your mom had the only copy." I closed my eyes. A strange heat rushed to my face, but it wasn't anger, not even betrayal. It was something simpler. "Confirmation." "She faked a miscarriage?" I asked. "I think so. She just started crying one day and said it was over. No doctor, no paperwork, nothing." I nodded even though he couldn't see me. "I should have told you sooner," he said. I didn't respond. "I know I don't deserve it," he added, "but I didn't want you walking around thinking you caused that." "You didn't," she lied. "I know," I said. And I did. Not because I had proof, but because some part of me had always known. There had been no glow, no fatigue beyond the usual, no cravings, no morning sickness, just words, and an audience willing to believe her. She wanted to stay. I said she wanted pity. She wanted someone to protect her, and when I stopped doing that, she built a reason for someone else to try. Jason was quiet. "I'm not excusing myself," he finally said. "I broke something I can't fix. But I needed you to know the pregnancy, it wasn't real." I took a breath. "I appreciate you telling me." There was a long pause. Then he said, "I hope you find peace, and I hope you don't let what we did stain your whole life." I didn't answer. I hung up and stood still in my kitchen. The knife still on the board, the salmon cooling beside it. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. It was like a knot had come undone inside me, a knot I had stopped noticing because it had been there so long. I walked over to my desk, opened a drawer, and pulled out the printed ultrasound my mother had left on my doorstep weeks earlier. I held it in my hands for a moment. Then I put it through the shredder. The sound was loud, mechanical final. After that, I sat down and wrote everything Jason had said, word for word, not to show anyone, just to keep. Just to remind myself that I wasn't crazy, that I hadn't been cruel, that I had been lied to. And I had walked away, not because I hated them, but because finally I loved myself more than I loved the version of family they kept offering. The one built on secrets. The one that always came undone. The next morning, I woke up to 3 missed calls from my mother and 1 message from a distant cousin I hadn't spoken to in years. They all said the same thing in different voices. Please reconsider. Melissa's hurting. Family is forever. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened my contact list, scrolled through names I had known my whole life, and began pressing block mom, dad, aunts, cousins, even childhood friends who had chimed in with opinions based on one side of a story. I wasn't angry, I was finished. There's a difference. That day, I went to the hardware store and picked out paint. Sage green calm, grounded. The kind of green that makes a room feel like it breathes again. I spent the weekend repainting the living room. I opened all the windows, played jazz from an old playlist I hadn't touched since college. The music filled the empty spaces with something soft, something that felt like mine. Then I moved the couch, took down the wedding photo and replaced it with an empty frame, not because I needed to erase the past, but because I was making room for what came next. I bought new curtains, light gauzy ones that let the morning sun through without apology. I ordered 3 indoor plants, 1 for the kitchen, 1 for the windowsill, and 1 that now sits in the corner of the living room like it's always belonged there. Every change was small, but together they were a quiet rebellion. Not against anyone else, but against the version of myself who stayed quiet to keep the peace. I rearranged the shelves, tossed out old notebooks I would never reread, packed up the mugs we bought as a couple and donated them to Goodwill, replaced them with plain white ones I actually liked. I cleaned the guest room, not because I was expecting company, but because I needed that space back. I opened the closet, boxed up the memories, and stacked them neatly in the garage. Nothing dramatic, no fire, no destruction. Just motion, just healing. And silence. But this time it didn't feel lonely. It felt like air. Like space to think. Space to live. I wasn't rebuilding a house. I was rebuilding a home. And for the first time in a long, long time, I wasn't doing it for anyone else. Just me. One evening, I found myself cleaning out the drawer in my nightstand, the one where things go when I don't know what else to do with them. Old receipts, broken pens, a pair of reading glasses I thought I lost, and buried beneath it all a folded printout from an airline confirmation. A flight to Charleston, 2 years ago. I had planned the trip as a birthday gift to myself. I wanted to walk the historic streets, drink sweet tea by the ocean, maybe even book one of those little art classes I'd bookmarked online. Jason hated the idea, said it was too hot, said vacations were a waste of time when he was between drafts. I canceled the flight without a second thought. Now I unfolded it again. And I didn't feel regret. I felt ready. I opened my laptop and searched for the same itinerary. The prices were higher now. The flight was shorter. 1 seat, 1 name, no compromises. I booked it for next Friday. It wasn't just a vacation. It was a promise to myself. That night, I called Rachel, an old friend from college I hadn't spoken to in months. She picked up on the second ring. Nancy, she said, surprised. We talked for 3 hours. She didn't ask about the drama she had seen the photos online, had read between the lines, but she didn't pry. Instead, she asked, "How are you really?" I paused, then told her the truth. "I'm healing slowly, but it's real this time." She exhaled like she had been holding her breath for me. "I always knew you'd find your way back." We made plans to meet in Charleston, just 2 women catching up in a city full of sunlight and bookstores. The next morning, I pulled out an old journal from my closet. The spine was cracked, the cover faded, but the pages were empty. Waiting. I wrote 3 lines. I no longer shrink to make others comfortable. I no longer mistake silence for peace. I no longer ask for permission to live my own life. Then I closed the journal and placed it by my bedside. That evening, I played my favorite jazz album and let the wind drift through the curtains. I lit a candle that smelled like orange peel and cedar wood, and I just existed. Not preparing for anything, not recovering from anything, just being. There was no applause, no audience. Only warmth, only breath, only me. It took me a while to understand that forgiveness doesn't always come with an apology. Sometimes it comes alone, quietly. One morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a pen and a blank sheet of paper. The house was calm. Outside, the trees were just starting to bloom again. The breeze drifted in through the open window, brushing my skin like a memory. I didn't write to them. Not to Hannah, not to Jason, not to my mother. I wrote to myself. I started with the truth. I'm sorry I let them make you small. Then I wrote everything I had been too tired to say out loud, every time I bit my tongue, every time I stepped aside, every time I carried weight that wasn't mine. I wrote it down and let the page hold it for me. I didn't edit. I didn't reread. I just wrote until it felt like breathing again. When I finished, I folded the letter in thirds and placed it in the same drawer where I had once stored my wedding certificate. That drawer used to hold so many things that defined who I thought I was supposed to be. Now it held something different. The truth. Not polished, not packaged for someone else's comfort. Just mine. I looked up at the wall where the wedding photo used to hang. In its place was an empty frame, a soft green wall behind it. No face, no name, just space. And somehow that blankness didn't feel sad. It felt clean. A quiet invitation to whatever comes next. Not to prove anything, not to earn anything, but to live. Fully, freely, finally. And this time without betraying myself to do it. Nancy's story reminds us that sometimes the deepest betrayals come not from strangers, but from those we once called family. In the quiet unraveling of her life, she found something stronger than revenge, self-respect. She didn't scream. She didn't beg. She chose herself not in anger, but in quiet resolve, through each step, removing their things, repainting her walls, booking a solo trip. She reclaimed more than just her home. She reclaimed her voice, her peace, her life. If you've ever been made to feel small in your own story, let this be a reminder. You do not need to explain your boundaries. You only need to honor them. If this story moved you, take a moment to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, or subscribe for more true-to-life stories that speak to the strength it takes to walk away and the healing that waits on the other side.